China and the U.S. traded barbs over which country poses the greater threat to global security at a recent UN event, with China's deputy envoy listing 10 facts on U.S. wrongdoings. Why are the two countries sparring over the issue, and what's the impact on China-U.S. ties? Also coming up in the program today, winter is coming, and with it, an inevitable second wave of COVID-19 in some parts of the world. What should we expect, and can we brace ourselves to minimize the impact? I'm Dong Shi in for Liu Xin today. Welcome to The Point. Thank you for joining us today. Now, first up, China's deputy permanent representative to the United Nations rejected accusations made by the U.S. representative against China on its arms control policy and COVID-19. Gong made the remarks last Friday in the general debate of the first committee of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. In his right to reply, he listed 10 facts about U.S. wrongdoings in disarmament and international security, and calling the U.S. the greatest threat to global strategic security and stability. What are those 10 facts, and what do crumbling China-U.S. ties mean for world peace and security? And with less than 1 month before the U.S. presidential election, how much farther will tensions escalate? Joining me today from Beijing, Professor Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, and also from Florida, Dr. Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow from the Independent Institute. Gentlemen, a pleasure to have you on The Point today. Now, a little bit more background for our viewers watching. This was the Disarmament and International Security Committee's general debate on October 9th, where a U.S. representative blamed China for COVID-19. That representative also said China must be held to account, and also claimed that Russia and China are engaged in a nuclear buildup. This is where I want to start with you, Dr. Eland. The U.S. has a problem with China and Russia's nuclear capabilities, but it seems perfectly okay with Washington itself upgrading its nuclear arsenal and lowering the threshold to use nuclear weapons. How does Washington justify those accusations against China?
Well, I think the U.S. thinks that they have good intentions and other countries don't, and that's what it amounts to. But of course, there's, with any sort of nuclear thing, there's always the desire to stay ahead of everybody. And of course, this, back in the Cold War, the Soviets were racing to catch up with the United States, and when they finally did in the early 1970s, that's when you saw the first arms control agreement on strategic weapons, the SALT I treaty. And so countries that are behind in the numbers or whatever, they tend to not want to be under control. And the U.S. feels right now, I think, that they need to modernize their weapons because of advances in Russian capabilities. And also, but the United States would also like to make it a trilateral type of arms control negotiations. Instead of in the Cold War, it was Russia and the U.S. Now it would be Russia, China, and the U.S. And, China, of course, doesn't have as many nuclear weapons as the two big nuclear powers, but China has tremendous potential to build them if they want to, because they're going to have the resources, the monetary resources, and the economic growth to do so. And I think the United States is also nervous about the potential for China. So, of course, they would want to bring China into this, tripartite nuclear arrangement. But the Chinese, of course, like the Russians in the 1960s and 50s, 60s, and up until the early 70s, they don't have as many weapons. Now, maybe China won't want to do that, and China's always been wiser, I think, than the United States by not spending as much on nuclear weapons because a certain amount is enough, probably. But, if China wanted to do that, they may not want to restrict their capabilities under any arms control negotiation. Unless the only solution would be for the two big powers to come way down where China is now. Maybe that would be a solution, but I don't think they do. So that's the current state of the argument right now, I think.
Professor Gong, I want to come to you now. In response to the U.S. accusations, China's Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN, Gong broke down what he described as the U.S. wrongdoings in disarmament and international security, calling the U.S. actually the gravest threat to global strategic security and stability. He listed 10 facts as a counter statement. We're going to put those 10 facts on the screen for our viewers to watch. I'm not going to go through them one by one. But Professor Gong, which of those facts stood out for you?
Well, I think all of them stood out for me, and some of them actually it's new information to me. But I think what's important is that there's actually really no comparison at all between China's nuclear capability and the United States. For example, Gong was talking about U.S. defense budget, right? It's 40% of the total world defense budget, and it's much larger than the next 10 combined countries' defense budget. The arsenal is in the thousands of nuclear warheads. China definitely just only have a few hundreds. And in addition to this, China has publicly announced a no first use policy, right? We actually publicly announced that we will never initiate a nuclear attack on anybody under whatever circumstances that. The United States haven't done that, right? So I don't think the United States will do that. In addition, I mean, look at the President Trump's rhetoric so far. It's not like the U.S. president hasn't threatened nuclear use of nuclear weapons. Firstly, for example, remember that tweet from him? He said "fire and fury," in his discussion, in his a tweet war with the dear leader in North Korea. So it's something, and China's never done that at all. So I think both from these perspectives I alluded to, the conclusion is very clear. There is really no foundation, in my opinion, that China should be dragged into this disarmament negotiation between the two nuclear powers that are much more powerful than China's arsenal, and they have a totally different policies with respect to the first use of nuclear weapons. So I think this is an orange-apple comparison. It doesn't hold water at all to me.
I want to bring another guest today, Wang Cong, chief reporter with the Global Times newspaper. Mr. Wang, you've been listening to my previous two guests. Professor Gong there mentioned military spending. Gong also pointed out that the U.S. ranks first in military expenditure. It spent more than $700 billion on military in 2019. That's nearly 40% of the world's total and more than the next 10 countries combined. I want to talk about this military expenditure because obviously in the past years the U.S. made sure that China knows Washington keeps a close watch on how much China spends on its military, but the U.S. continues to spend massive sums of money on its military, $700 billion a year. With all that spending on its military, would you say the U.S. has been contributing to world peace at large, or has the U.S. been creating problems regionally?
I think when Ambassador Gong spoke about that, it's absolutely correct. The U.S. is the gravest threat to global security at the moment. Not just because of the military spending, because that has been the case for many years, but before, at least, the U.S. government were responsible and well respected because it stood up for value. However, once President Trump came into power, I mean, we have seen the U.S. become so destructive in the multilateral system. They have withdrawn from the UN system. They have withdrawn from global treaties, and now they're going to the UN and accusing China and Russia to be the threat of global security. I think it's just very twisted logic. I mean, now the U.S. is this, not just the military spending. Also, it is still conducting multiple wars in the Middle East, and it's deploying missile defenses in Europe, Asia, and now it's using the UN multilateral platform to preach its warmongering rhetoric. And what's appalling to me is not just the U.S., what it does, what the Trump administration did in the UN, it's the other member states, it's other, the European allies, it's other major powers who did not stand up to these warmongering rhetoric at the UN. They should stand up, because Geng Shuang, although he put it quite eloquently, the 10 facts about the U.S. risks, but no other major power came forward and speak to that and stand up to that. I think that's just appalling and quite dangerous.
Dr. Eland, you might have different opinions on what Geng Shuang called a grave threat to world peace and stability, but when it comes to U.S. military spending, what has resulted from that massive amount of money, and does the result justify the goal?
Well, of course, the goal is to be the world's premier superpower, and I think that Chinese economic growth is competing with that. You have to have money to do that, and the United States, because of some of the Trump economic policies, have grown the debt, and prior presidents as well, like Obama and Bush before them, they've grown the debt and the budget deficit. And so I think, but the military has a tremendous interest in the United States as far as getting more money. So the budget keeps going up, even though the U.S. debt, is increasing. I mean, we're in the absurd situation now of essentially borrowing money from China to build more weapons to help defend, supposedly in the Far East, against China, growing Chinese power. So, that's an absurd situation. I think that, the Trump administration does need to answer for the fire and fury comments. Those were unnecessary. And it also needs to, answer for really radical moves like taking out the #2 Iranian leader for no apparent reason. That's very dangerous. If we remember, World War I started when the #2 guy in the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated by the Serbs. It didn't seem like it was going to start a world war, but it does. So these types of, rash behavior on the part of the President of the United States really has to, when combined with the tremendous military power that the U.S. has, really has to be, corrected. And we're having an election in this country this year, and I think, the situation in the next few weeks, if you can make it past that, or even after till January 20th, when a new president is maybe inaugurated, we'll have to see what the election is. But I think the problem could get worse. The rash behavior could get worse before it gets better. But after, if the election changes the government, you may see a totally different policy towards China.
We don't have a lot of time left. I do want to spend some time on the upcoming U.S. presidential election. Professor Gong, I know you're keeping a close eye on that. The election is only a few weeks away. China remains on both parties' agenda. Some say all of these Cold War connotations and a finger pointing at the UN addressed by U.S. representatives are part of Trump's campaign strategies to blindfold his domestic problems. Will it work? Will bashing China work this time on the campaign trail?
It has failed. It's not going to work. I mean, for a long time, President Trump has been trying to shifting the attention, shifting the campaign issue away from the COVID-19 issue and to blame China. He's been trying this for a long time, and he has totally failed. With his own infection, I think it's testament to his total fiasco in handling this situation. He's going to be gone in 3 weeks. I think, you look at the swing states polls. He's trailing behind big time in Michigan, in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, in Arizona for that matter, and as well as in Pennsylvania and Florida. And I would even argue that he's practically trailing every single swing states, the 6 swing states. Maybe he's just neck to neck with Mr. Biden in North Carolina. But regardless, I think it's been gone. It's not only going to be a big loss for him, it's going to be a landslide victory for Vice President Biden. It's going to be an avalanche. It's going to be a tsunami. You know, he's going to be gone, and he's going to be disgraced. I think it's probably the worst president in United States history.
I know what the polls say, but if history taught us anything, it's that polls could be wrong. That's why we'll all keep watching how things unfold in those last few weeks leading up to the U.S. presidential election. I want to thank all three of my guests for joining me on this topic. Professor Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. From Florida, Dr. Eland, Senior Fellow from the Independent Institute. Wang Cong will stay with me here on the program for our discussion in the second half.